Jibe, a teasing remark. So this picture, Kayla responded very maturely, exaggeration, when her brother made a quick jibe at her for not getting the joke. Okay? So her brother teased her for not getting the joke, and so she did not respond very maturely by sticking her tongue out at him. So this is sarcasm. She was not very mature. So the sentence is like, she responded very maturely. That kind of attitude. Okay? But the point is, a jibe is a teasing remark. My siblings make jibes at me all the time. Hey. It looks crazy. Aiden? You like what? Take the L? Oh, take the L. Kind of, yeah. Okay? A jibe. And this one should be the last one. For this. Maybe. Or kind of. Grueling. Very difficult or exhausting. Okay, mountain climbing is a very grueling activity. Grueling. Sometimes you feel like your homework is very grueling. Okay? Yeah.
Can I copy my notes for
yesterday? Yes. Can you give him your... Yes. Edgar? The theme? The vocab? That's what we're doing right now.
No, Caleb.
Oh, can you do it for Caleb? Yes, please. That'd be great. Sadiqa? I know. It's because I didn't change it. That was my fault. Connor?
On the first one, it looks like the girl from Hungry.
Katniss? Yeah. A girl from a movie. Ian? You said it looks like the girl from Hunger Games. The first picture. Okay, Jacob? Jacob. You sit? Okay, you sit down. You can do it. Just let it, you know what, just get a paper and write it on that form. That way, at least he has it. All right. Go ahead and put that away and take out your book, please. And we'll read chapter 8 together. We're going to be on page 103. Now, remember that for the last, I don't know, about 4 chapters or so, Trumpkin has been telling the children everything that's been happening, right? He just started at the very beginning with how Caspian, why he had to escape the castle, how he escaped, how he came in contact with the Narnians, the feast at the Dancing Lawn. Now then, yesterday he was talking about how they were at Aslan's house and they were getting attacked by Miraz. So Caspian had to blow the horn for help, and he had to go through all the different steps. This is a chapter where we finally come back to present day. Okay? So now we're coming back to Trumpkin talking to the children after he's caught them up. Sadiqa? Yes. He is the dwarf that was talking to the children.
I know, he was about to get killed. I thought the book said in the first, second, or third chapter, I thought it said he had black hair.
Nickabrick has black hair.
I know, but doesn't it say in second chapter that he has black hair, Trumpkin?
No, he is red. He's a red dwarf.
Yeah, but he's a red dwarf.
No, Nickabrick is a black dwarf. Trumpkin is a red dwarf. 2 different tribes. Luke? Yeah, it does look like Peter. But I do think it's supposed to be Caspian. But it might be Peter. I don't know, because there's a lion on his chest. Hey. 8. How they left the island. And so, said Trumpkin, for as you have realized, it was he who had been telling this story to the 4 children, sitting on the grass in the ruined hall of Cair Paravel. Thank you, Edgar. And so I put a crust or 2 in my pocket, left behind all weapons but my dagger, and took to the woods in the grey of morning. I had been plugging away for many hours when there came a sound that I'd never heard the like of in my born days. I won't forget that. Where is he headed to? Where was he headed to? He had left the camp of the Narnians. He was headed to what? Wyatt? Cair Paravel. Good. Where was Pattertwig headed? Luke? To the lamppost. Why were they going to those 2 places? Manny? Very good. Because they were the most magical places in the times of old. Good. The whole air was full of it, loud as thunder, but far longer, cool and sweet as music over water, but still strong enough to shake the woods. And I said to myself, if that's not the horn, call me a rabbit. And a moment later, I wondered why he hadn't blown it sooner. What time was it? Asked Edmund. Between 9 and 10 o'clock, said Trumpkin. Just when we were at the railway station, said all the children, and looked at one another with shining eyes. What had happened at 9 or 10 o'clock while the children were at the railway station? Brooklyn? Yes, but what caused that to happen? Very good. Yep.
Now I know how it feels.
Please, go on, said Lucy to the dwarf. Well, as I was saying, I wondered, but I went on hard as I could pelt. I kept on all night, and then, when it was half light this morning, as if I'd no more sense than a giant, which we found out yesterday, 2 days ago, the giants are not very clever, I risked a short cut across open country to cut off a big loop of the river, and I was caught. Not by the army, but by a pompous old fool who has charge of a little castle, which is Miraz's last stronghold toward the coast. I needn't tell you they got no true tale out of me. But I was a dwarf, and that was enough. But lobsters and lollipops! It's a good thing the Seneschal was a pompous fool. Anyone else would have run me through there and then. But nothing would do for him short of a grand execution, sending me down to the ghosts in the full ceremonial way. Okay, so let me pause there for a second. While Trumpkin was trying to make his way to Cair Paravel, he was caught by one of Miraz's last, by like a lighthouse full of men who served Miraz. Okay, so they caught him, but any sensible soldier would have just killed him. He was a traitor, he was an enemy, whatever. But this guy was so proud, he wanted to make a big show of it. You know what I mean by that? He wanted to take Trumpkin down to the river, release him to the ghosts, and kill him in such a way that would make him look really wonderful. So that Miraz would know, oh, this servant of mine, he did a great thing in capturing this dwarf and blah, blah, blah. He was just being super prideful about it. But it worked out well because while they were trying to take Trumpkin down to be executed, that was where the children found him. Does that make sense? That's why he's saying, oh, thank goodness he was a prideful old man, because otherwise he would have just killed me on the spot and I never would have met you guys. You see what I'm saying? Okay. And then this young lady, he nodded at Susan, does her bit of archery, and it was pretty shooting, let me tell you. And here we are. And without my armor, for of course they took that. He knocked out and refilled his pipe. Great Scott, said Peter. So it was the horn, your own horn, Sue, that dragged us all off that seat on the platform yesterday morning. I can hardly believe it, yet it all fits in. I don't know why you shouldn't believe it, said Lucy, if you believe in magic at all. Aren't there lots of stories about magic forcing people out of one place, out of one world, into another? I mean, when a magician in the Arabian Nights calls up a jinn, it has to come. What jinn is she talking about? Luke? Very good. We had to come too, just like that. Yes, said Peter. I suppose what makes it feel so queer or odd is that in the stories there's always someone in our world who does the calling. One doesn't really think about where the jinn's coming from. Well, and now we know what it feels like for the jinn, said Edmund with a chuckle. Golly! It's a bit uncomfortable to know that we can be whistled for like that. It's worse than what Father says about living at the mercy of the telephone. But we want to be here, don't we? Said Lucy. If Aslan wants us. Meanwhile, said the dwarf, what are we to do? I suppose I better go back to King Caspian and tell him that no help has come. No help, said Susan. But it has worked. And here we are. She's like, hello, we're right here to help you. Oh, yes, to be sure. I can see that, said the dwarf, whose pipe seemed to be blocked. At any rate, he made himself very busy cleaning it. But, well, I mean... But you don't yet see who we are, shouted Lucy. You are stupid. Well, I mean, I suppose you're the 4 children out of the old story, said Trumpkin. And of course, I'm very glad to meet you, of course. And it's very interesting, no doubt. But, okay, no offense? And he hesitated again. Do get on and say whatever you're going to say, said Edmund. Well then, no offense, said Trumpkin. But, you know, the king and Truffle Hunter and Dr. Cornelius, they were expecting, well, if you see what I mean, help. Well, to put it in another way, I think they had been imagining you as great warriors. As it is. I mean, we're awfully fond of children and all that, but just at the moment, in the middle of a war, I'm sure you understand. Okay, what is Trumpkin trying to get at here? What do you think?
That they're just kids.
Very good. They're just kids. He's like, we were looking for warriors to help us, not children. Yes.
So they were expecting adults.
They were expecting adults. Remember, the last time they had seen Susan, Peter, Edmund, and Lucy, they were all adults in Narnia when they left. So when they came back, they were expecting them to be adult warriors again. Aiden?
Kind of funny because, well, I never thought that Lucy would actually yell at a
Yeah, I know. You know, but Lucy, she's sometimes you don't mess with her. Okay, you mean you think we are no good? Said Edmund, getting red in the face. Why is he getting red in the face? What does that mean?
He's mad because he's saying that the Lucius.
Mm-hmm. Now, pray, don't be offended, interrupted the dwarf. I assure you, my dear little friends, little coming from you is really a bit too much, said Edmund, jumping up. Why does he say that? Luke? Yeah, exactly. It's like somebody shorter than you calling you a little friend. He's like, okay, all right. I suppose you don't believe we won the Battle of Baruna? Well, you can say what you like about me, because I know. Now, there's no good losing our tempers, said Peter. Okay, remember when I told you that Edmund is kind of like the fiery one? He often thinks before, or he speaks before he thinks, right? Peter's a little more reasonable. So here we have an example of that. Edmund's getting all fired up, like, you don't believe who we are, you know how much we've done, and we want all of this. And Peter says, listen, it's no use. And he's right. Is there really any use in proving to this dwarf right now that they are who they say they are? No. They know who they are. They know who Aslan has declared them to be, and that's all they need. Okay? Hold on. There's no good losing our tempers, said Peter. Let's fit him out with fresh armor and fit ourselves out from the treasure chamber, and have a talk after that. Well, I don't quite see the point, began Edmund, but Lucy whispered in his ear, Hadn't we better do what Peter says? He is the High King, you know, and I think he has an idea. So Edmund agreed, and by the aid of his torch they all, including Trumpkin, went down the steps again into the dark coldness and dusty splendor of the treasure house. Layla? Huh? Hothead, yes. That's a great way to describe him. Sadiksha? Well, Trumpkin is calling him small, but yes, that too. The dwarf's eyes glistened as he saw the wealth that lay on the shelves, though he had to stand on tiptoes to do so, and he muttered to himself, It would never do to let Nickabrick see this. Never. They found easily enough a mail shirt for him, a sword, a helmet, a shield, a bow, and quiver full of arrows, all of dwarfish size. The helmet was of copper, set with rubies, and there was gold on the hilt of the sword. Trumpkin had never seen, much less carried, so much wealth in all his life. The children also put on mail shirts and helmets. A sword and a shield were found for Edmund, and a bow for Lucy. Peter and Susan were, of course, already carrying their gifts. As they came back up the stairway, jingling in their mail, and already looking and feeling more like Narnians and less like schoolchildren, the two boys were behind, apparently making some kind of plan. Lucy heard Edmund say, No, let me do it. It will be more of a success for him if I win, and less of a letdown for us all if I fail. Okay, so we're on page 108. What's happened so far is the Trumpkin has finished telling the children the history of what's happened since they've been gone, and they're leading him back to Cair Paravel, and he basically says, okay, listen, I realize they confirmed that it was the blowing of the horn that brought them to Narnia. Okay, so Trumpkin says, okay, well, we blew the horn and no help came, and the children got kind of offended. They were like, hold on, we're right here. He's like, yeah, but when we blew the horn, we kind of thought we were going to get some warriors, some adults, and we end up with kids. No offense or anything, but you guys don't look like you can fight very well. Okay, so now what Edmund just said is he said, no, let me do it. Okay, it will be more of a success for him if I win and less of a letdown for us all if I fail. What he means by that is this. Whatever he and Peter are talking about, he says, listen, let me be the one to do it. If I win, it's going to hurt his pride pretty badly. And if I lose, it's not that big of a deal. Okay? Because I'm Edmund. If Peter were to beat Trumpkin in whatever they're talking about, it would be a little more obvious because he's Peter the High King. He's supposed to win, right? But if little Edmund wins, that's more of an upset. You see what I'm saying? And then if Trumpkin were to lose to Peter, if Peter were to lose, it would be like a huge defeat, right? That would be like taking down the top dog. But if Edmund loses, well, at least you still have the top dog there. You see what I'm saying? He's like, there's less risk if I'm the one to win. Do you see what I'm saying? Or if I'm the one to fight. We don't know what they're going to do yet, though. He just wants to be the one to do it. All right, Ed, said Peter. When they came out into the daylight, Edmund turned to the dwarf very politely and said, I've got something to ask you. Kids like us don't often have the chance of meeting a great warrior like you. Would you have a little fencing match with me? It would be frightfully decent. What does he mean by a fencing match? Ian?
So like in a fencing match, you try to knock the other your opponent's sword out of the...
Correct. A sword fight. He challenges the dwarf to a sword fight. Oh, but, lad, said Trumpkin, these swords are sharp. I know, said Edmund, but I'll never get anywhere near you, and you'll be quite clever enough to disarm me without doing me any damage. Well, it's a dangerous game, said Trumpkin, but since you make such a point of it, I'll try a pass or two. Why is Edmund acting like, oh, but, what do you say? I'll never get anywhere near you. Brooklyn? Correct. So Edmund's playing off his pride and kind of manipulating him into doing what he wants. Both swords were out in a moment, and the three others jumped off the die, or like the balcony deck area, and stood watching. It was well worth it. It was not like the silly fighting you see with broadswords on the stage. It wasn't even like the rapier fighting, which you sometimes see rather better done. This was real broadsword fighting. The great thing is to slash at your enemy's legs and feet, because they are the part that have no armor on them. And when he slashes at yours, you jump with both feet off the ground so that his blow goes under them. This gave the dwarf an advantage because Edmund, who, being much taller, had to be always stooping or bending over. I don't think Edmund would have had a chance if he had fought Trumpkin 24 hours earlier. But the air of Narnia had been working upon him ever since they arrived on the island, and all his old battles came back to him, and his arms and fingers remembered their old skill. He was King Edmund once more. Round and round the two combatants circled, stroke after stroke they gave, and Susan, who never could learn to like this sort of thing, shouted out, "Oh, do be careful!" And then, so quickly that no one, unless they knew, as Peter did, could quite see how it happened, Edmund flashed his sword around with a peculiar twist. The dwarf's sword flew out of its grip, and Trumpkin was wringing his empty hand as you do after a sting from a cricket bat. So he's kind of like, so all of a sudden, Edmund had disarmed Trumpkin. He was like, ow, kind of like, oh, okay, that was really good. You know what I'm talking about? It was like he was fighting, all of a sudden it came out of his hand, he was like, ooh, ouch, kind of hurt. Not hurt, I hope, my dear little friend, said Edmund, panting a little and returning his sword to its sheath. Okay, I see the point, said Trumpkin dryly. You know a trick that I never learned. That's quite true, put in Peter. The best swordsman in the world may be disarmed by a trick that's new to him. I think it's only fair to give Trumpkin a chance at something else. Will you have a shooting match with my sister? There are no tricks in archery, you know. Luke? Yep. Why does Peter challenge Trumpkin to a shooting match with Susan? Riley? They're proving to him that they are the help that he wants. Yes.
And also, a fencing match isn't really just disarming. You have to like try to get the tip of the sword into your opponent.
Yes, you are correct. Give me that too. Ah, you're jokers, you are, said the dwarf. I began to see, as if I didn't know how she can shoot after what happened this morning. All the same, I'll have a try. He spoke gruffly, but his eyes brightened, for he was a famous bowman among his own people. All 5 of them came out into the courtyard. What's to be the target? Asked Peter. I think that apple hanging over the wall on the branch there, that would do, said Susan. Yeah, that'll do nicely, lass, said Trumpkin. You mean the yellow one near the middle of the arch? No, not that, said Susan. The red one up above, over the battlement. The dwarf's face fell. What does it mean by that? And the dwarf's face fell. It didn't literally fall. What does it mean? Ian? Yeah, he was like, oh yeah, I got this. You mean that yellow one right there? She goes, no, the red one. He goes, oh. That's what it means when your face fell. Okay? The dwarf's face fell. Looks more like a cherry than an apple, he muttered. But he said nothing out loud. What does that mean? It looks more like a cherry than an apple. Matthew?
He said that it's so far away that it looks
Very good. It looks like a cherry because it's so far away, which is going to be much harder to hit. They tossed up for first shot, kind of like tossing a coin, greatly to the interest of Trumpkin, who had never seen a coin toss before, and Susan lost. They were to shoot from the top of the steps that led from the hall into the courtyard. Everyone could see from the way the dwarf took his position and handled his bow that he knew what he was about. So he was a good bowman. He was a good archer. Twang went the string. It was an excellent shot. The tiny apple shook as the arrow passed, and a leaf came fluttering down. Did he hit the apple? No, but he only missed by a tiny little bit. Then Susan went to the top of the steps and strung her bow. She was not enjoying her match half so much as Edmund had enjoyed his. Not because she had any doubt about hitting the apple, but because Susan was so tender-hearted that she almost hated to beat someone who had been beaten already. She felt bad because she knew she was going to beat him, and he had already lost once today. The dwarf watched her keenly as she drew the shaft to her ear. A moment later, with a little soft thump, which they could all hear in that quiet place, the apple fell to the grass with Susan's arrow in it. "Oh, well done, Sue!" shouted the other children. "It wasn't really any better than yours," said Susan to the dwarf. "I think there was a tiny breath of wind when you shot." No, there wasn't," said Trumpkin. "Don't tell me that. I know when I'm fairly beaten. I won't even say that the scar of my last wound catches me a bit when I get my arm well back." He's like, "Yeah, no, I know you won. I won't even mention this injury I have that sometimes catches when I pull my arrow back, you know." Why does he mention that? Luke? As an excuse. Yeah. "Oh, are you wounded?" asked Lucy. "Do let me look." No, it's not a sight for little girls," began Trumpkin, but then he suddenly checked himself. "Wait a minute. There I go, talking like a fool again," he said. "I suppose you're as likely to be a great surgeon as your brother was a great swordsman, or your sister a great archer. Why does he say he was talking like a fool? What did he say that was foolish? Connor?"
He was like underestimating her again. He was like saying, just.
Very good. He's like, "This is not for little girls." Oh, wait. Maybe you're not a little girl. Good word, underestimate. That's perfect for what he's doing. He sat down on the steps and took off his hauberk and slipped down his little shirt, showing an arm hairy and muscular in proportion, as a sailor's, although not much bigger than a child's. There was a clumsy bandage on the shoulder which Lucy proceeded to unroll. Underneath, the cut looked very nasty, and there was a good deal of swelling. "Oh, poor Trumpkin," said Lucy. "How horrid!" Then she carefully dripped onto it one single drop of the cordial from her flask. Go fast. "Hullo! What have you done?" said Trumpkin. But however he turned his head and squinted and whisked his beard to and fro, he couldn't quite see his own shoulder. Then he felt it as well as he could, getting his arms and fingers into every difficult position as you do when you're trying to scratch a place that is just out of reach. Then he swung. Do that again, Jacob. Just like that. That's kind of what he's doing. He's like, "What'd you just do to me?" Then he swung his arm and raised it and tried the muscles and finally jumped up to his feet crying, "Giants and junipers! It's cured! Why, it's as good as new!" After that, he burst into a great laugh and said, "Well, I've made as big a fool of myself as ever a dwarf did. No offense, I hope. My humble duty to your majesties all. Humble duty. And thanks for my life, my cure, my breakfast, and my lesson." The children all said it was quite all right, and not to mention it. Have they proven themselves to him now? Yes. Jacob?
I just cannot believe he actually forgot about the story about her going down this room.
Well, he didn't believe in him, remember?
No. Oh, yeah.
He thought they were all myths and fairy tales. And now, said Peter, if you've really decided to believe in us. Oh, I have, said the dwarf. It's quite clear what we have to do. We must join King Caspian at once. The sooner the better, said Trumpkin. My being such a fool has already wasted about an hour. It's about 2 days' journey the way you came, said Peter. For us, I mean. We can't walk all day and night like you dwarfs. Then he turned to the others. What Trumpkin calls Aslan's How is obviously the stone table itself. You remember it was about half a day's march, or a little less, from there down to the fords of Varuna. Varuna's Bridge, we call it now, said Trumpkin. Well, there was no bridge there in our time, said Peter. And then from Varuna down to here was another day and a bit. We used to get home about tea time on the second day, going easily. Going hard, we could do the whole thing in a day and a half, perhaps. But remember, it's all woods now, said Trumpkin, and there are enemies to dodge. Look here, said Edmund. Need we go by the same way that our dear little friend came? Oh, please, no more of that, your majesty, if you love me at all, said the dwarf. Why does he say that? Does he want to be called dear little friend? No, he doesn't like it. He's like, please don't call me that. That's kind of embarrassing. Very well, said Edmund. May I say our DLF? Oh, Edmund, said Susan, don't keep on at him like that. That's all right, lass. I mean, your majesty, said Trumpkin with a chuckle. A jibe won't raise a blister. What's a jibe? Jacob? A joke. He's like, that's all right. A joke's not going to hurt me that bad, I guess. That's what he means. And after that, they often called him the DLF, till they'd almost forgotten what it meant. As I was saying, continued Edmund, we needn't go that way. Why shouldn't we row a little south till we come to Glasswater Creek and row up to it? That brings us up behind the hill of the stone table, and we'll be safe while we're at sea. If we start at once, we can be at the head of Glasswater before dark, get a few hours' sleep, and be with Caspian pretty early tomorrow. Oh, what a thing it must be to know the coast, said Trumpkin. None of us knows anything about Glasswater. Well, what about food? Asked Susan. Oh, well, we'll have to do with apples, said Lucy. Do let's get on. We've done nothing yet, and we've been here nearly 2 days. And anyway, no one's going to have my hat for a fish basket again, said Edmund. They used one of the raincoats as a kind of bag and put a good many apples in it. Then they all had a good long drink at the well, for they would meet no more fresh water till they landed at the head of the creek, and went down to the boat. The children were sorry to have to leave Cair Paravel, which, even in ruins, had begun to feel like home again. The DLF had better steer, said Peter, and Ed and I will take an oar each. Half a moment, though. We'd better take off our mail. We're going to be pretty warm before we're done. The girls had better be in the bows and shout directions to the DLF, because he doesn't know the way. You'd better get us a fair way out to sea till we've passed the island. Yes.
What's the
Dear little friend is their nickname for Trumpkin. Yes. Oh, no.
Yeah.
And soon the green wooded coast of the island was falling away behind them, and its little bays and headlands were beginning to look flatter, and the boat was rising and falling in the gentle swell. The sea began to grow bigger around them, and in the distance, bluer, but close around the boat it was green and bubbly. Everything smelled salty, and there was no noise except the swishing of water and the clop-clop of water against the sides, and the splash of the oars and the jolting noise of the rowlocks. The sun grew hot. It was delightful for Lucy and Susan in the bows, bending over the edge and trying to get their hands in the sea, which they could never quite reach. The bottom, mostly pure pale sand, but with occasional patches of purple seaweed, could be seen beneath them. "It's like the old times," said Lucy. "Do you remember our voyage to Terabithia, and Galma, and Seven Isles? Oh, and the Lone Islands?" "Yes," said Susan. "And our great ship, the Splendor Hyaline, with the swan's head at her prow and the carved swan's wings coming back almost to her waist." Quiet, face this way for me. "Oh, and the silken sails and the great stern lanterns? And the feast on the poop and the musicians?" Okay, let me explain what this means. You're talking about the poop deck. It's the particular part of the boat. It's not actually poop. Every year. Every year. "Do you remember when we had the musicians up in the rigging playing flutes so that it sounded like music out of the sky?" Presently Susan took over Edmund's oar and he came forward to join Lucy. They had passed the island now and stood closer in to the shore, all wooded and deserted. They would have thought it very pretty if they had not remembered the time when it was open and breezy and full of merry friends. "Phew! This is pretty grueling work," said Peter. "Can't I row for a bit?" said Lucy. The oars are too big for you," said Peter shortly, not because he was cross, but because he had no strength to spare for talking. "So, where are the children in the dwarf headed?" Connor?
To the creek which takes down to the castle.
Good. They're rowing on Glasswater Creek right now, which will take them to Aslan Tau. Okay? But they're gonna have to avoid all of Miraz's men before they get there. Okay? Alright. Take out your packet and turn to the themes section, please.